You know, I was sitting with a patient last week, a woman, 74 years old, sharp as a tack, and she said something that stopped me cold. She said, "Doctor, I do everything right. I take my medications. I go to my appointments. I eat my vegetables. But I'm not getting better. I'm just getting managed." And I sat there for a moment because she wasn't wrong. She walks every day. She takes her calcium, her vitamin D, her blood pressure medication. She gets her mammograms and her colonoscopies on schedule. By every metric we use in medicine, she's a compliant, responsible patient. And yet, and this is the part that haunts me, she told me she feels weaker every year, more fragile, less like herself. So what's happening here? What are we missing? I've been practicing medicine for over 30 years. Internal medicine, geriatrics, teaching at the university, working in clinics and hospitals. And I'll tell you something that took me a long time to fully understand. There's a difference between being treated and actually recovering. There's a difference between being monitored and being helped. And for many adults over 70, maybe for you, watching this right now, that difference is everything. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. Just a few things I've learned over the years that most of my patients have never been told. First, your ability to recover from illness, injury, or even a bad night's sleep changes fundamentally after about age 65. It's not just slower, the mechanism is different. The signals your body sends to repair itself start to get quieter. Second, and this one really surprises people, many common medical tests and interventions that feel like safety nets can actually interfere with recovery in older adults. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm saying they carry risks we don't discuss enough. Third, and this is probably the most important, some of the things we were taught to do for our health decades ago, things that made sense at 40 or 50, can actually work against us after 70. I'm not here to scare you. I'm really not. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. The body's capacity to recover doesn't just disappear, it changes. And if we understand how it changes, we can work with it instead of against it. So let me walk you through this carefully, because I think you deserve a real explanation, not a pamphlet, not a rushed 7-minute appointment, a real conversation, the kind I wish every patient could have with their doctor. Let's start with the biology, and I'm going to explain this the way I explain it to my patients, not the way I'd explain it in a medical journal. When you're young, and by young, I mean under 50, your body is in constant rebuilding mode. You injure a muscle, your body sends repair cells. You catch a cold, your immune system mounts a strong, fast response. You don't sleep well for a few nights. Your brain compensates. It's resilient. It bounces back. What we've learned over the years is that this recovery capacity isn't infinite. It runs on certain biological systems, cellular repair pathways, hormone signals, immune coordination, something called autophagy, which is basically your body's way of cleaning up damaged cells. And all of these systems start to slow down as we age. Now, here's the part that doesn't get discussed enough. This slowdown doesn't happen uniformly. It's not like a car running out of gas. It's more like certain instruments in an orchestra start playing off tempo. The music still goes on, but it's not quite right. And if you don't notice it early, the whole piece can fall apart. After about age 65, your muscle tissue starts to change. You lose what we call satellite cells. These are the repair cells that live in muscle and activate when there's damage. So, when you strain something or even just overuse a muscle, the rebuilding process takes longer. Sometimes it doesn't fully complete. At the same time, your bones are becoming more porous. This is especially true for women after menopause, but men are affected too. The problem isn't just that bones get weaker. It's that the balance between breakdown and rebuilding shifts. Your body becomes better at taking bone apart than putting it back together. And then there's the nervous system. This is something I see constantly in my practice. Older adults start to lose proprioception. That's your body's sense of where it is in space. You don't feel your feet quite as clearly. Your balance reactions slow by a fraction of a second. That doesn't sound like much, but it's the difference between catching yourself and falling. I had a patient a few years ago, a man named George, 78, former engineer. Brilliant man. He came to me because he'd fallen twice in 3 months. Nothing catastrophic, but it shook him. He said, "I don't understand. I've always had good balance." And I had to explain to him, his balance wasn't failing. His recovery was. His body wasn't adapting to small changes the way it used to. A slightly uneven sidewalk, a rug that shifted underfoot, things that his younger self would have adjusted to without thinking were now genuine challenges. This is what I mean when I say recovery changes. It's not dramatic, it's subtle. And because it's subtle, people don't realize it until something goes wrong. Now, here's where I'm going to say something that might sound strange coming from a doctor. Sometimes, more medical care makes recovery harder. Let me be very careful here, because I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not anti-medicine. I've devoted my life to medicine. But I've also seen, over and over again, how the system can work against older patients without anyone meaning it to. Let me give you an example. A 70-year-old woman comes in for a routine checkup. She feels fine. She's managing her blood pressure, her cholesterol is acceptable, she's active. But because she's 70, we do some screening tests. A full metabolic panel, a scan here or there, and we find something. Maybe it's a small nodule on her thyroid. Maybe it's a spot on her kidney. Maybe it's an irregular reading on one of her heart tests. Now, in most cases, these findings are what we call incidentalomas. They're things that were probably there for years. They're not causing symptoms. They may never cause problems. But once you see them, you can't unsee them, and the system kicks into gear. More tests, a biopsy, follow-up scans every 6 months, referrals to specialists. Suddenly, this woman who felt fine is spending half her time in waiting rooms, worrying about a thing inside her body that might not ever hurt her. And here's the part no one talks about. That stress, that worry, that constant medical engagement, it affects recovery too. We know from research, good, solid research, that chronic stress impairs immune function. It disrupts sleep. It increases inflammation. It pulls people away from the activities that actually keep them healthy, like exercise, socializing, spending time outdoors. And so this woman who came in feeling fine starts to feel worse, not because of the nodule, because of everything around the nodule. I've seen this more times than I wish I had. There's something in medicine we call the cascade effect. One test leads to another. One finding triggers a chain of interventions. And before you know it, a healthy older adult is being treated like a patient in decline, even though they weren't declining until we started looking. I want to be fair here. The doctors involved in this aren't villains. They're doing what they were trained to do. When you see something abnormal, you investigate. That's the protocol. The problem is that the protocol was largely designed for younger, sicker patients. It doesn't always translate well to older adults who are fundamentally stable, and the research backs this up. There was a large study, I won't bore you with the details, that looked at screening in older adults and found that many interventions, particularly aggressive screening after age 75, didn't actually improve outcomes. In some cases, they led to complications from the treatments themselves. Procedures carry risks. Anesthesia at 82 is not the same as anesthesia at 52. Biopsies can cause bleeding, infection, anxiety. So what I tell my patients is this. Before you agree to any test, ask 2 questions. First, what will you do differently if you find something? And second, what's the chance that this test will lead to something harmful? These aren't easy questions, but they're the right ones. All right, enough about what goes wrong. Let's talk about what works, because there are things you can do, real, practical things to support your body's ability to recover, and I've seen them make a genuine difference. The first, and probably the most important, is resistance training, strength training. And I know a lot of people hear that and think, I'm not going to the gym. That's for young people. But let me explain why this matters so much. Remember those satellite cells I mentioned, the repair cells in muscle? Research has shown that resistance training, even light resistance, even seated exercises with resistance bands, can actually reactivate those cells. It sends a signal to the body. This muscle is being used. We need to rebuild it. I had a patient, 81 years old, who could barely get out of a chair when I first met her. Her legs had just gotten weak over the years. She wasn't sick. She wasn't in pain. She just hadn't used those muscles enough, and they'd atrophied. We started her on a very simple program, seated leg exercises, standing holds, eventually some light resistance with bands. Within 4 months, she was walking to her mailbox without a cane. Within a year, she told me she felt stronger than she had at 75. Now, was that a miracle? No, it was biology. She gave her body a reason to rebuild. The second thing I want to mention is nutrition, and specifically protein. This is something most clinics don't explain. After about age 65, your body becomes less efficient at using dietary protein to build muscle. It's called anabolic resistance. What this means, practically, is that older adults often need more protein than younger adults, not less. The general recommendation most people hear is about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But for older adults, especially those trying to maintain or rebuild muscle, the evidence suggests something more like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram. For a 150-pound person, that's around 70 to 80 grams of protein a day, which is more than many older adults actually eat. And it matters when you eat it, too. Spreading protein intake across meals, having a real portion at breakfast, not just toast and juice, helps keep the muscle-building signal active throughout the day. I'm not talking about supplements here. I'm talking about food, eggs, fish, poultry, beans, dairy if you tolerate it. Real food. Your body knows what to do with it. The third area, and this one is underappreciated, is balance training. Not just exercise, but specific work on balance. Remember George, the engineer who fell twice? After we talked about what was happening with his nervous system, we got him started with a physical therapist who specialized in older adults. They worked on single-leg stands, heel-to-toe walking, turning exercises, things that seem almost too simple to matter. But within a few months, something shifted. George stopped gripping walls when he walked. He started trusting his body again. His recovery wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He felt like himself. That's what I mean about restarting recovery. It's not one thing. It's a combination: muscle, nutrition, balance, confidence, and when you put them together, the results can be remarkable. Let me talk about something that sounds too basic to matter, but absolutely does: sleep. After age 60, sleep architecture changes. You spend less time in deep sleep. That's the stage where most physical repair happens. You wake more often. You may have trouble staying asleep even when you feel tired. And here's what happens as a result. Your body's overnight repair processes get interrupted. Inflammation builds up. Cognitive function suffers. The hormones involved in muscle maintenance, growth hormone, testosterone, are released during deep sleep, so when sleep is fragmented, those signals weaken. What I tell my patients is this: you may not be able to sleep like you did at 40, but you can improve what you've got. Keep a consistent sleep schedule. Avoid screens in the hour before bed. Keep the bedroom cool and dark. Limit caffeine after noon, and I mean noon, not 3 p.m. These things sound small, but they compound over time. And while we're on the topic of basics, hydration. Older adults are at much higher risk of dehydration, partly because the thirst signal gets weaker with age. You don't feel as thirsty, so you don't drink enough. And dehydration impairs everything: kidney function, blood pressure regulation, cognitive clarity, muscle performance. I've had patients come in feeling confused and weak, and it turned out they were just dehydrated, not seriously ill, not in need of a scan or a referral, just dehydrated. A few days of proper fluids, and they felt like themselves again. Sometimes recovery isn't about adding treatments, it's about restoring foundations. Now, I want to address something that might feel uncomfortable, because I've been suggesting that sometimes less intervention is better. And I know that can sound scary. We're taught culturally, medically, from every direction that doing more is caring more. More tests, more specialists, more medications. It feels responsible. It feels like we're fighting. But what I've seen, again and again, is that for older adults, particularly those who are fundamentally stable, the best thing is often thoughtful restraint. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Helen, 83 years old, living independently, managing her health well. She came to me after seeing a cardiologist who'd found a mild valve abnormality on an echocardiogram. Nothing symptomatic, but he'd recommended a cardiac catheterization to get a better look. Helen was terrified, not of the procedure itself, but of what it might find and what might happen next. So we talked about it. We talked about the actual risk of the abnormality, which was low. We talked about the risks of the catheterization at her age, which were not zero. We talked about what we would realistically do if we found something which, in her case, was probably nothing aggressive anyway. And in the end, she decided to wait, to monitor symptoms, to come back if anything changed. That was 4 years ago. Helen is still living independently, still active, still well. The valve hasn't changed. And she avoided a procedure that, while well-intentioned, may not have helped her and could have set off a whole new cascade of interventions. Now, I'm not saying that was the right choice for everyone. It was the right choice for Helen, given her specific situation, her values, and her priorities. That's the point. These decisions should be individual. They should be thoughtful. They shouldn't be automatic. And I want to say this directly. You have the right to ask questions. You have the right to ask, what happens if we don't do this test? You have the right to ask, is this intervention likely to extend my life or just add more appointments? You have the right to be a participant in your own care, not just a recipient of it. Medicine at its best is a partnership, and good doctors, the ones I admire most, welcome those questions. I've been doing this work for a long time, long enough to have seen trends come and go, long enough to have changed my own views on some things. And what I believe now, after all these years, is this: aging isn't the enemy. What damages people isn't age itself, it's the loss of function, the loss of independence, the loss of the feeling that your body still belongs to you. And the tragedy is that so much of that loss is preventable. Not all of it, not everything, but more than we realize. When I see an 80-year-old who has maintained her strength, her balance, her clarity, she didn't do it by accident. She made choices. She kept moving. She ate well. She stayed connected to people. She didn't accept decline as inevitable. And when I see someone who has declined more than expected sometimes, yes, it's illness. But sometimes it's inactivity. It's isolation. It's the slow withdrawal from life that happens when we stop believing recovery is possible. I want you to believe it's possible, because the evidence says it is. There was a study, I think it was out of Scandinavia, but the specifics blur after a while, that looked at very old adults, people in their 90s, and put them on a resistance training program. And they got stronger, measurably, significantly stronger, not younger, not disease-free, but stronger, more capable of living independently, more able to get up from a chair, to walk without assistance, to take care of themselves. If someone in their 90s can improve, then surely, those of us in our 60s, 70s, and 80s have room to grow too. So what should you actually do? Let me offer a few thoughts. First, if you haven't done any resistance training, talk to your doctor about starting. Ideally, work with a physical therapist or a trainer who has experience with older adults. Start small. You don't need to lift heavy weights. You need to challenge your muscles enough to trigger a rebuilding response. Second, look at your protein intake honestly. Keep a food diary for a few days and see where you are. If you're eating mostly carbohydrates, bread, pasta, cereal, and not much protein at breakfast or lunch, consider adjusting. It doesn't have to be dramatic. An egg at breakfast instead of just toast, some chicken or fish at lunch, a handful of nuts. These things add up. Third, work on your balance. Stand on one leg while you brush your teeth. Hold onto the counter at first if you need to. Do heel-to-toe walks down your hallway. If you can, try a Tai Chi class or a balance-focused exercise group. These things feel too simple to matter, but they do. Fourth, protect your sleep as much as you can. Make it a priority. Treat your sleep environment like it matters, because it does. And fifth, this is perhaps the hardest one. Learn to ask questions of your medical care, not to be combative, but to be informed. When a test is recommended, ask what it's for, what you'll do with the results, and what the risks are. When a medication is prescribed, ask whether you still need it, whether the dose is right for your age, whether there are alternatives. You deserve care that's tailored to you, not care that follows a protocol designed for someone 20 years younger. I want to leave you with something that one of my mentors told me many years ago. He was an old-school physician, the kind who made house calls well into the 1,990 seconds. And he said, "The goal of medicine for older adults isn't to fight death. It's to protect life, the actual lived experience of being alive." That stuck with me, because sometimes, in our rush to find and treat everything, we forget what we're trying to preserve. Not just heartbeats, not just test results, but the ability to walk in your garden, to have lunch with a friend, to read a book without fatigue, to feel like yourself. Recovery after 70 is possible, but it requires us to think differently, to respect the body's changed landscape, to invest in the things that actually help strength, nutrition, balance, rest, and to be cautious about the things that might not. It requires us to ask better questions and to expect better answers. And it requires a kind of patience with ourselves, because recovery at this stage isn't fast. It's not dramatic. It's cumulative. It's the result of small, consistent choices, day after day, that compound into something significant. You're not too old to improve. You're not too far gone. And you're certainly not just someone to be managed. You're a person with a body that still wants to heal. We just need to give it the right conditions. I hope this has been helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your own experiences with recovery, with medical decisions, with the questions